Greetings, it is I, Tentus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my expose on the history of Magic the Gathering, where I take you set at a time through the history of every product released by Magic the Gathering. This week, I've got another new one that we haven't talked about, of course, Darksteel. Now, Darksteel was released on February 6th of 2004, and it had 165 cards. It was the second set in the Mirrodin block, and of course it continued with the themes of artifacts and equipment, but it included the themes of Indestructible and Pulses, and it had the keywords of Affinity, which it was talking both about Affinity for artifacts and a new one, Affinity for basic lands, and it introduced the keyword of Modular. Its symbol was actually a miniature Shield of Kaldra, one of the cards from the set. Now, of course, as I was talking about, it continued the artifact theme that had been established within Mirrodin, but it introduced a new type of artifact also, Darksteel artifacts, which in particular were the keyword Indestructible, that everything that was Darksteel was, of course, indestructible. It also included a new update for the Lucky Charms, which had been something that had been printed a lot since Unlimited now, but we now had a new updated version of it. Now, when it was sold in 15-card booster packs, 4 pre-constructed decks, and of course a fat pack. The pre-release was on January 24th, and the pre-release card was a foil Shield of Kaldra with alternate art than what had been established before, so we continued the new alternate art for a pre-release card. It also was accompanied by a novel of the name Darksteel Eye. Now, the storyline has Galissa and her 2 new traveling companions, Slobad, a goblin, and Bosch, a golem, learning that the world itself they were on is hollow. There's an opening deep underground. The 3 of them travel to Lumengrid and eventually find the Pool of Knowledge, a portal deep within the core of Mirrodin that they're able to use, Lumengrid being the Vidalcan capital. So they dive deep into the Pool of Knowledge, travel into it, and enter into the core of Mirrodin. There they encounter the mysterious fungal-like Mycosynth and see the true core of Mirrodin, which is this massive ball of pure energy at the center of this place. There they also meet Memnarch, who has been, in a way, expecting them to come down here. That he is not a legend, that Memnarch is the true ruler of this place, almost. They learn that Memnarch has been building this monument to his greatness as an artificer and master over this plane, the Darksteel Eye, which he will be able to use to finally complete his omniscience over the very plane itself, to truly be the, in a way, god of this place. Now, Darksteel, like Mirrodin, was notoriously powerful when it came to tournament play. It, just like its predecessor, showed off a lot of problems. The fact is, there's a couple of cards that have been banned and extended, Skullclamp and Aether Vial, which, they were banned and extended. It also showed some bans within Standard that occurred during this time, which it had been years since anything had been banned within Standard. It also has some problems within Vintage, that they had to make some bans and restrictions within that too. Of course, the ban within Standard, it had been 5 years since they had to do that. But for the extended ban, for the extended restriction, they restricted Arcbound Ravager and Trinisphere. So you can see there are 4 big cards here that have major impacts that were restricted or banned. And there was the banning that occurred within Standard. 5 years since they had to do that. 5 years. Think about that. Now, the keywords that were introduced here, of course, were modular first. A modular creature came into play with a number of +1/+1 counters on it. But when this modular artifact creature would die, the +1/+1 counters on it would be you could move them to another artifact creature. So effectively, my modular creature here dies, I can transfer its +1/+1 counters to another creature and grant it those +1/+1 counters. Indestructible was intrinsically linked to the Darksteel title, and what Indestructible did was it prevented a artifact, in this case, from being destroyed. They simply cannot be destroyed by any means, by any kind of card or by damage itself. Now, since then, Indestructible has spread to other areas from Darksteel and is used in other ways, but the original incarnation of it was particularly with Darksteel-type artifacts. Now, it did, of course, continue affinity from artifacts, but it introduced a new type of infinity within this set, affinity for basic lands. and it would be affinity for a basic land of a certain type. Swamps, islands, mountains, etc. Now this set had 4 cycles. The first cycle was a cycle of affinity golems. These were common golem artifact creatures that had affinity for a basic land of a certain type. So 5 different golems, 5 different basic lands that each of them had affinity for. There was also a cycle of echoing spells. Each of these echoing spells, you would choose and target a card, and then all cards with that same name would be targeted by the echoing spell. Effectively, it would echo across all of them. Of course, it had its own cycle of lucky charms I talked about. It cost 2 mana, place 1 out, and when every color that is mentioned on the card is played, a spell of that color is played, you gain a life. Unlike the previous type of lucky charm where you'd have to pay mana to gain that life, this one you just gain it. No mana needs to be paid. And the last was the cycle of pulses. Rare spells which would cost you 1 colorless and 2 of the mana that it's from the color of. And effectively, it would give you some kind of resource, an amount of a resource to you. And if an opponent has more of said resource that you just gained of, you return this pulse back to your hand. So if the resource is giving you something that you don't have more than your opponent of, you can repeatedly play it in order to gain up to the number that is equivalent at least to your opponent. Now there was one mirrored pair, Emissary of Hope and Emissary of Despair. They are spirits that have to do with the number of artifacts another player controls, and it either has to deal with gaining life or losing life. It had 3 reprinted cards, including Fireball. It had 2 functional reprints, including Golem's Eye in place of Sisay's Ring from Weatherlight, and it had 1 color-shifted card, Ritual of Reconstruction, which is a color-shift version of Reconstruction from Antiquities. Now, the 4 pre-constructed decks were a red deck called Master Blaster, a black deck called Mindswarm, a white-green deck called Swarm and Slam, and a blue deck called Transference. So let's talk about some of the cards that were in this set. There was Ether Snap. You remove all counters from all permanents and remove all tokens from the game. So this way you can clear out tokens and counters from the game. Wham! Very good anti-artifact, but also could be very good anti-token deck if you don't have any and you want to play against them. Aether Vial, which I'd mentioned. At the beginning of your upkeep, you put a charge counter on Aether Vial. You can tap Aether Vial to put a creature with a converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Aether Vial from your hand into play. That's why it's very powerful, because every turn you could play a bigger and bigger creature. Ageless Entity. Whenever you gain life, you may put that many +1/+1 counters on Ageless Entity. It just keeps bigging. Great in a life gain deck. Arcbound Ravager. You could sacrifice a artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on Arcbound Ravager. It starts at a 0/0 with a modular 1. So effectively you could feed it artifacts, maybe artifact token creatures, to get it bigger and bigger, and should it die, you put all those counters on something else. Blinkmoth Nexus. You can tap for colorless mana. You can pay 1, and Blinkmoth Nexus becomes a 1/1 flying creature that's also a land until end of turn. That is an artifact creature. Or you could tap it with 1 mana to give target Blinkmoth +1/+1 until end of turn. It does count as a Blinkmoth when you change Blinkmoth Nexus into a creature. Core Tapper. Tap it to put a charge counter on target artifact you control, or sacrifice it to put two charge counters on target artifact you control. Darksteel Colossus. An 11/11 trample Indestructible, that if it's put into your graveyard from anywhere, any location, hand, play, whatever, should it go into your graveyard, you shuffle it back into your library. Very powerful Darksteel thing. Darksteel Forge. Artifacts you control are indestructible. Simple as that. Darksteel Ingot. It is indestructible and can tap for a mana of any color. Deathcloud. Each player loses X life. Each player discards X cards. Each player sacrifices X creatures. And each player sacrifices X lands. You only have to pay X once to basically ruin everyone's day. Maybe yourself a little bit? Hard to say. Fangren Firstborn. When Fangren Firstborn attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each other attacking creature you control. Pumps up all your stuff. Geth's Grimoire. When an opponent would discard a card, you may draw a card. So in a discard deck, you start getting more cards back. Last word. It cannot be countered by spells or ability. you counter a spell. So it's as simple as that. It can't be countered back, but you can counter something. Leonid Shikari. You could activate the equipment cost of an equipment whenever you could play an instant. So now you can equip things anytime rather than just like a sorcery, which you could only do before. It's all the time now. Lich's Tomb. You don't lose the game for having 0 or less life. Whenever you would lose life, you sacrifice 1 permanent that you have for each life you would lose. So you don't lose at 0. It's just that as long as you have this out protecting you if you're 0 or below, you lose permanents in addition to actually taking that damage. It's just or loss of life. It's just the loss of life, it doesn't kill you. Memnarch, a 4/5 legend. For a colorless and 2 blue, target card is now an artifact among all of its other types. So he changes everything into being artifacts. And then for 3 colorless and 1 blue, you steal an artifact. You gain control of it. So Memnarch, for enough mana, can change something into an artifact and then take it for your control. Mycosynch Lattice. All permanents in play are artifacts in addition to any other type that they had before. So now everything in play is artifacts. Every card not in play, every spell being cast, and every permanent is colorless now. And mana can be spent as if it was any color at this point in time. So you can spend mana of whatever color it is as any other color for the purposes of playing spells. So it makes everything artifact in a way, and everything colorless in a way. Mirror Matrix. It's indestructible. Mirror, get +1/+1, and for 5 mana, you put a mirror token into play, a 1/1 mirror token into play. Nemesis Mask. Equip for 3. All creatures able to block the equipped creature must do so. So it's the lore spell, which I talked about in the past sets, in equipment form. Panoptic Mirror. So it has an imprint. For X and tapping it, you can exile from your hand an instant or sorcerer that converted mana cost of X from the game. So you imprint it that way. Then at the beginning of your upkeep, you may copy a instant or sorcery exiled with Panoptic Mirror, put a copy into play, and you don't have to pay the mana cost for this copy. You just play it. So effectively you can use Panoptic Mirror to exile a bunch of instants or sorceries, and you can choose one each of your upkeeps to play. Pristine Angel. It's a flyer that as long as Pristine Angel is untapped, it has protection from all colors and from artifacts. And if you should play a spell, you may untap Pristine Angel. So effectively, you could do stuff to attack with it and play a spell and untap it then afterwards, which it would have its protections once more. Reshape. It's an X-cost spell that in addition to its cost, you sacrifice an artifact, but you can search your library for an artifact of converted mana cost X or less and put it into play. Savage Beating. This one, it is an entwined spell, so you have to choose one or both of these, depending on if you're paying the entwined cost, but you can only play it during your turn and during your combat phase. Either all your creatures gain double strike until end of turn, and or, depending if you play Entwine, you untap all your creatures and get an additional combat phase after this one. The Shield of Kaldra. When the Shield of Kaldra is into play, the shield, sword, and helm of Kaldra are all indestructible. You can equip it for 4. Equipped creature is indestructible. So a lot of indestructible with the Shield of Kaldra on the board. Shunt. Change the target of a spell that's targeting a single target to another target. So effectively, I move the target of this spell from this single target to another single target. Skull Clamp. You can equip it for 1. Equipped creature gets +1, -1. So toughness goes down. And if equipped creature is put into the graveyard from play, you draw 2 cards. So I can put Skull Clamp on 1/1 tokens. Instantly kill them, get 2 cards for 1 mana. That's why Skull Clamp is very powerful. Slowbad. Goblin Tinkerer. Sacrifice an artifact. Target artifact gains indestructible until end of turn. There's a Sword of Fire and Ice. You equip for 2. Target creature gets +2/+2, has protection from blue and red. And if the equipped creature should deal combat damage to an opponent, then you may deal 2 damage to target creature or player and draw a card. There's also the Sword of Light and Shadow. equip 2. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from white and black. If it deals combat damage to an opponent, you may gain 3 life and then return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Both the swords are very powerful, and their more modern counterparts are, of course, mythic. The Synod Artificer. For X and tap, you can tap X target non-creature artifacts, or for X and tap, you can untap X target non-creature artifacts. Great for either tapping or untapping a lot of artifacts. For very little, especially if it's mana creating artifacts. Good combos there. Trinisphere. As long as Trinisphere is untapped, if a spell would be played and had a converted mana cost of less than 3, its converted mana cost becomes 3. This is paid for by the extra with, of course, colorless mana. So if it would have a normal casting cost of, let's say, a black and a colorless, now its casting cost is a black and 2 colorless. But the converted mana cost of the spell becomes 3 as long as it's untapped. For all spells, minimum effectively. Turn the tables. All combat damage that we've dealt to you this turn is instead dealt to target attacking creature. So effectively, if you're being attacked by a whole bunch of creatures, you can turn all that damage that's about to hit you to damage only affecting one of those creatures. Viridian Zealot. It's a 2/1 that for a colorless and a green, you could sacrifice it to destroy target artifact and enchantment. I use it in a green-black Graveyard Resurrection deck where I can get rid of artifacts and enchantments by sacrificing it, and usually something else bad happens when I sacrifice it, so I like it for a lot of combos. That's why I talked about it. Well of Lost Dreams. Whenever you gain life, you may pay X, where X is equal to or less than the amount of life you just gained. So it doesn't have to be equal to the life you gained, it can be less than that. You draw X cards. So effectively, this is the I'm gaining life, I'm drawing cards artifact. I love it for my life-gaining deck. I'd recommend it too. Whispersilk Cloak. For equipped 2 artifact, that is of course equipment, that equipped creature is unblockable and has Shroud, i.e. can't be the target of spells or abilities. So this one, you can put it on something and it can't be blocked, and of course you can't target it, and it can murder you then. Darksteel Citadel. It's the Indestructible artifact land. So it's another artifact land, it's specifically indestructible, and it taps for a colorless. That's about it. And finally, Darksteel Reactor. It's indestructible. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a charge counter on Darksteel Reactor. When you have 20 or more charge counters on Darksteel Reactor, you win the game. So it is yet another alternate win condition, this time with putting charge counters on Darksteel Reactor, which there are always extra ways of putting extra charge counters on it. Something like a bunch of core tappers or something, make you win the game faster. There you go. So that's it for today. I introduced you to Darksteel. Just like Mirrodin, this was an incredibly powerful set that has repercussions even to now. It introduced us to Indestructible, which of course it started only with Darksteel, but it has spread since then. There is now Indestructible in many places. Oftentimes nowadays it's either artifacts or white. White has become the purview of Indestructible in many ways. But it is out there, that it is a powerful ability that was introduced here. Other things like module and some of the other connections to things haven't spread since Darksteel, but we can see its influence. It introduced many powerful combos and a bunch of powerful cards that I've talked about, that some of them are, yes, banned and restrictions in various formats, but there are many that are still have a great amount of power you can use today. Darksteel Forge is a key item in artifact decks. It makes all your artifacts indestructible. Why wouldn't you use it in an artifact deck, especially if you're doing modern or legacy or vintage? Those are the point in times that it fits perfectly in with this. So you can see there are other cards too, which are excellent ones that have added to many decks since then. And this is another set that proved itself powerful beyond what they expected. And it resulted in some standard bans, which they hadn't had to do in years. So it is an influence in the fact that it has introduced both this powerful ability and the fact that it itself was as powerful as it was. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows support the channel, the empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. If you want to check out some other great Magic the Gathering content, I can recommend Card Bazaar, They Said, We Said, and Tasty Snackies, my friends the Multiverse. But until the next time, I bid you farewell.